2019, together with Ragnhild Nabben, I started a non-profit futures agency. Now, you may wonder, what is a non-profit futures agency? And we'll get to that. But first, the why. We were used to considering the future as something outside of us, something dictated by confident voices telling us what the future will be like, what the next big thing is, and what we should do today to prepare or profit. This is especially true in the case of technology. In 2019, the next big thing was the metaverse. Today, of course, it's the promise of artificial superintelligence. And to be frank, we were sick of it. Because all this confident talk about the future happened and still happens on the background of climate change, biodiversity loss, and a lack of strong action in dealing with the root causes of all of this destruction. The shift happened for us when we realized that the future these people were talking so confidently about, it doesn't exist. Well, of course you might say the future doesn't exist yet. But that word at the end there, that yet, makes all the difference between something that seems inevitable and something that remains pure fiction until you and I make it real by buying what these prophets of the future are selling. This realization was a minor revolution for us. Because if the future can only become real through our collective action in the present, then each of us is already engaged in creating the future. And if we are already creating the future, we can create a different one. And if we can create a different future, you and I have an obligation to help create a good future. But how do we do that? Well, the word good means lots of different things to different people. But there is one thing we know for certain about the future, about any future really worth passing on to our children and grandchildren. It has to be based on the principles of sustainability. What we as humans do must fit within and strengthen nature's capacity to support us. Our societies must make the lives of everyone better, and our economies must serve people, not the other way around. So we have a responsibility to help create a sustainable future. But how do we do that? That's a big question. But I'll show you a way of breaking that big question down into 3 smaller ones. And now I need your help. I want you in the audience to consider each of these questions as I ask them and give me your response. Are you ready? Okay. First question. What's not sustainable in the way we do things today? And forget about being diplomatic. Allow yourself to be purely negative for a moment. What's
fossil fuel industry?
Fossil fuel industry. Thank you. Anyone else? Everything. Yeah. Anyone else? War. Flying.
New highways, motorvägar.
New highways. Yeah. Capitalism.
The educational system.
The educational system. Okay, thank you. There are lots of things here, lots of hands. I can see you take this very seriously, and I'm very grateful. But I have one more question that I'd also like you to respond to. Are you ready? Okay. If you could decide, without limitations, what does a sustainable future look like? And forget about what's realistic for the moment. Allow yourself to imagine what you would really like to see. Hard question. Anyone? Yes.
Where we spend not too much, but we think that it's a limited amount of things we can spend.
Where we are aware of the limits of how much we can spend. Good. Anyone else? Yes.
We are not treating the environment as a reservoir where we just take resources, but we're part of the environment.
We go from treating nature as a reservoir where we can extract to seeing ourselves as part of nature. Great. One more?
Good schools.
Good schools. Thank you. Okay. So why this works? By first allowing ourselves to be purely negative, not constructive, purely negative, we have a much better chance of discovering what's wrong and actually needs to change. By then allowing ourselves to imagine an ideal, even unrealistic future, we have a much better chance of discovering what we really want. Which brings us to the third question. How do we begin to move from where we are today to where we would like to be in the future? Let that one work in your subconscious while I continue. These three questions correspond to the three phases of the future workshop: critique, utopia, and realization. The future workshop was the first method we learned and used at our company. It was created by Robert Jung and others in Cold War Austria. Back then, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the people who were most confidently talking about the future were a private research institute with close ties to the US military, RAND. And what RAND were talking about was how to win a nuclear war against the Soviet Union. So, at a time of great risk and reckoning, Jung and others thought there must be a better way of doing things. Their answer was the future workshop, and it remains one of the most powerful tools there are for engaging people in discovering better ways of doing things. And you can make the future workshop even more powerful by adding this question. What if? What if everyone at your workplace earned the same salary? What if everyone did across all sectors of society? Say 700,000 Norwegian kroners per year, whether your job mostly involves writing emails or washing floors. Could you live well on that? Probably. But the point isn't the policy, it's the possibility. It's about challenging assumptions. We have a tendency to assume that things have to be the way they are. And so when we try to imagine the future, we tend to imagine something that looks quite a lot like the present, with a few small changes. More technology, less emissions. However, everything we take for granted, for example, that on the only planet in the known universe with a breathable atmosphere, most of us spend most of our time inside little boxes called houses, looking at even smaller boxes called screens. Everything we take for granted, all of culture, society, and structure, was created by people just like us, and so could be changed by us. In doing this, in identifying assumptions that we take for granted and asking yourself, what would the future be like if this was no longer true? You are in effect opening up a space, a bigger space, of possible futures. And you may discover in one of those futures something you would like to make real today. Taken together, the three questions of the future workshop and this what-if lens gives you a powerful tool for discovering practical ways in which your workplace, your studies, your neighborhood, anything really that you care about, can become part of the answer to that big question I posed earlier. How do we create a sustainable future? And in thinking and talking about the future in this way, you are also becoming what UNESCO calls futures literate. You are learning to use the future as a tool. That brings me back to the beginning. I said initially that Ragnhild and I started our non-profit futures agency in 2019. That's not entirely accurate. Back then, we had no idea what kind of company we were starting. We knew we wanted to help contribute to a sustainable society, and we thought that working with imagination was key, but we didn't know how. So what did we do? Well, we did what everyone did back then before AI chatbots. We searched the internet. And we discovered two things. An article outlining the future workshop method by Kirsten Påby, who's been instrumental in bringing Jung's ideas and methods to Norway. And a piece on futures literacy by Per M. Koch, who's helped spread that concept in Norway. Ragnhild picked up the phone and dialed Kirsten's number. I called Per. Since then, we've talked to lots of different people and tried many different things. But if it weren't for these two, we might not have discovered our contribution to a sustainable society in the form of a non-profit futures agency. And now finally, the answer to that initial what question. At our company, we use the future as a tool to challenge assumptions about the way things have to be, to show what's actually possible, and teach others to do the same, like I've begun to do with you here today. And now, it's up to you. Turn to the person next to you and start creating the future.